Blessed day, soul family. Welcome back. Martial Mystic calendar series for 2026. We are coming to the end of April. It's Resolution Thursday, end of April, but beginning of spring. So, what does that mean? Well, we are, we have an opportunity to talk about anger. We have an opportunity to talk about impatience. We have an opportunity to talk about irritability. We have an opportunity to humanize it, normalize it, and look at it for what it is. So we'll be talking about spring. We'll be talking about the energy of anger, the organ of liver. We'll be talking about balancing emotion, the martial artist's path to liberation, the civilian's path to liberation, and how to neutralize and strategize for when the energy arises, because we want this energy to flow smoothly. If you are interested in your chi flowing smoothly, then you are invested in looking at anger, the dark side of spring. So here we are, the dark side of spring, and we went through this yesterday through Wellness Wednesday. We've added a little bit more to it. So we'll be talking about the balancing energy of benevolence. We'll be looking at anger a little bit more closely. Let's remind ourselves that the element is wood here in spring. Like a tree in spring, the liver's energy, the associated organ, is characterized by expansion, upward movement. But here's the key: flexibility, not upward movement and rigidity. The live and living wood and branch is malleable, bendable, and springy. The dead wood is rigid, hard, and when we act hard or rigid, we are likely to break like a twig. The function is often called the general. Here in spring, we are blooming, wanting to bloom, especially if you are living around in accordance with the seasons. So maybe you got a garden going. What am I going to grow? Our neighbors just picked up some chickens and goats, so they're blooming that. It could be an entrepreneurial venture, but the liver is responsible for the smooth flow of chi and strategic planning within the body. So the liver is a pillar in this way. With the river ecology as a metaphor, when the liver chi is stagnant, the river of our internal energy becomes a swamp, murky, heavy, and frustrated. We want that clear, settled snow globe like environment. Okay. Because the darkness we want settled. Okay. So that we can be transparent and clear. When we start to move, though, like the snow globe, the silt starts to get shaken up. So we have to be careful of what's arising. Spring is the season of thawing, where ice melts and the water must be guided to flow freely to nourish the rest of the garden. So in martial arts, this could look like competition, winning, attachment, and then um, delusion and frustration and anger that come about of that attachment. So for those who have practiced and experienced martial arts, you've likely gotten frustrated in competition or even in practice or in fighting. And sometimes people can frustrate each other, and then it can escalate into an actual fighting. So that's why usually there's a referee there to mediate fairness and agreements that are made, right? So in mediation, we learn when the trust is low and emotions are high, the rules of engagement have to be spelled out. So we got to think about when we're interfacing what the rules of engagement are, right? And if the emotion, if the trust is there, if the emotion is not inflamed, then the rules of engagement can be casual. But we have to have more care and more strategy when there's escalation or inflammation, right? And so maybe you might think that when you're sparring, you don't need a referee. Maybe you'd feel safer if there was a referee, if there was someone watching, right? Maybe you need to communicate, I don't want to go that hard, or maybe you want to communicate that's too hard for me. But you might be conflicted because you don't want to look like a wimp or something like that. These are situations that come up and happen, especially in martial arts settings and for young men. So, so that brings us to the civilian aspect when we get frustrated and how the principles can overlap. So, what we want to look at is the nature gong fu aspect, the gong fu of internal vision. When we reflect and we look at ourselves, we can see, are we bending? Are we springy? Are we malleable in the situation when our patience is low? Or are we putting our foot down, sinking our heel in, meeting force with force, right? Then, because in Tai Chi, we desire to neutralize force and blend with force, listen to force, engage with force, but yield. And there's that bendy, springy part that we need to be conscious of. So the internal work is regulating one's own thoughts, breath, and emotions. And it involves moving from an uh, tuttered condition, untutored, toward an ideal state of being through constant introspection. Huh. Untutored. Interesting. The indoor self is just as a master teaches techniques in the inner room. They usually call it behind closed doors, indoor student and outdoor student. This concept suggests that true self-growth happens in one's private reflections and daily habits. This is very important because when it comes to the habits that we build, especially when the liver energy starts to get inflamed, what are the habits that we have built or we've allow people to build around us so as to engage with it in an appropriate way? We have the unity of knowledge and action, 知行合一. A core pillar of this cultivation is ensuring that what you learn is actually manifested in how you live. So here we go, how martial arts can play into training, can play into integration in everyday life. True Kung Fu is seen when a person's private character matches their public words. So, and that's not about being perfect or holding people to perfect standards, but understanding that, we're all learning, practicing, and putting our best foot forward at times. Sometimes speaking personally, we fall short of our standard and of our vision. Rectifying the mind. This is the practice of polishing one's inborn potential. I love this idea of polishing, always coming back to and always working on, reflecting. That's also the recursive aspect of training, Kung Fu and Tai Chi training, that circular coming back aspect, yin and yang, where there's the putting out, there's the bloom, and then there's that recycle coming back, reflection, blooming, reflection. The martial virtue, Wu De, are concepts like humility, perseverance, and patience. Those are considered the internal skills that allow a person to handle life's challenges with the same grace as a martial arts master. So for us martial artists, um, this is why parents like to put their kids in martial arts classes because they instill discipline, perseverance, respect, um, and working working through those inner struggles. And the martial artist eventually puts themselves on a path towards self-mastery. There we go, nature kung fu. So with that in mind, now we can look at the dark side of spring and understanding that we're not perfect. There is a shadow. There is the anger, the impatience, the arrogance, the irritability. But if we can recognize the shadow, then that brings us to awareness and recognition to cultivate the positive, stay flexible, and then bloom with integrity. So let's look at um, because if we're able to take this path on, it's a very courageous path. Then we start to walk the path of enlightenment and liberation. So we're going to refer to and go back to, we're going to come back to this here in a second. But let's remind ourselves of the concept of self-recognition, self-awareness, self-awakening, and then the freedom from emotional bondage, right? So, as taught by my teacher, Dr. Yang Ming, we are taught here in the West, if I say freedom, what does freedom mean here from the Western perspective, right? And let's try to contrast that with, okay, well, what would the word freedom look like from an Eastern perspective? Okay. So for me, the Western perspective is like the bald eagle comes to mind, the American flag comes to mind, guns come to mind, maybe the Matrix with cultural movie movies and in terms of bondage and mental slavery, right? In the East here, what we're looking at is freedom from the Shin, the emotional mind, and cultivating the Yi, the horse mind. This is part of the five regulations of body, breath, mind, chi, and spirit. When you're cultivating the mind, you're regulating the Shin, the heart mind, understanding that the heart can have an effect on the thoughts, the thinking, and then eventually the actions. Essentially, is the Wu De, right? Those who hurt people, we've heard say. Those who are in pain inflict pain on other people. So, with this in mind, then we get the martial moralities, which is um, under the banner of benevolence, humility, respect, righteousness, trust, loyalty, will, endurance, perseverance, patience, and courage. So, in knowing that we all have liver energy, and it's springing forth, we all can humanize and normalize that we all get irritable, irritated, frustrated, and we can say, "Oh, your liver's on fire," rather than you're, being mean to me, or you're being a this or that or the other, or they were this or that and the other, because we want to understand that we do it too, right? We want to have the self empathy and mutual empathy for anger wherever it arises, whether anger arises in oneself or anger arises in the perceived other, the oneself that is in the mirror, okay? Yourself and your perceived other. So the habit and the practice and the skill here is when it arises, Okay, liver's on, liver's on fire for whatever reason. There's irritability, there's frustration, there's anger. Why? Because there's pressure, there's resistance. Okay. And that takes us back to the 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 sprout that is under the pressure of the ground and the pressure of the sun, right? That wants to bloom out and burst out with life, right? Which is essentially that seedling and is the in a way the uh energy of nature and nature's template, nature's creation template. Nature experiences pressure too, and it utilizes that pressure for growth, movement, expansion, right? Because that seedling, that sprout, is taking energy and transmuting it into growth. It's taking sun, it's taking pressure, it's taking water, and it's taking all those conditions to make life. I love this. It's great. It's so profound and interesting. And then so that is what we are doing too. We are also part of nature. We have creative spark, inspiration, intention, drive, right? But then when two people that are driving seemingly toward one another, then we have clash, right? Well, that's not my idea. That's or my idea is better than yours, or you're wrong, right? And then you get into the who's right, who's wrong, win, lose, and then you start to apply mutual pressure, mutual resistance toward one another. You lose the plot of the of life, living and learning. And that's the dark side and the consequences of the dark side here in spring, right? So the dark side here in spring is that you lose the plot of life, living, love, and creativity, ambition, and drive, right? If you start to see the perceived other as giving you pressure and resistance, that's going to stimulate your liver chi. That's going to stimulate the frustration and the anger. So in Tai Chi, what we do is learn to yield. We have the sense for listening and the sense for communication, that we sense and feel the resistance and the pressure, but we don't apply more pressure to it. In fact, we actually yield slightly to it. When we yield to it, we gain information. That's a reflective yin component and a data processing component. That's the yin side of our growth, our output, our bloom, our manifestation, because we need to see what the undercurrent and what the recourse and what the consequence is for what we're putting back. So that's why we can't just always stay young and keep going forward, 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 move, 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 right? There needs to be that contemplation, that reflection, the yin aspect, um, so that we can utilize that information and then we apply our our soft force, not our hard force, but our soft force. Nature is the same way. That's why nature moves in a spiral. That's the hallmark of nature's creative template and the basis for Tai Chi movement. So remember that this is the spiral is actually 3D, right? Maybe even four dimensional, maybe even dimensions that we don't even know. But in this case, what we're looking at is the um, from the center to the outer. I would say, what is that? What is this? A two-dimensional image? But let's remind ourselves that we are living in live space and time, right? So we never um, are going to, we're never going to be in the same place. This same spiral here is actually moving up, right? If we're ascending, it's spiraling up, right? This could be the anger, right? This could be the anger ascending. Oh, I'm gonna boil over here, right? Unless I come back down, unless I descend. That could be like our that's the parasympathetic response, relaxation, the down regulation, right? To ascending energy. Okay. Because this could also be spiraling down. We could also spiral down here. Spiraling down, descent could also be into depression. There's always yin and yang. Yin and yang continues to break down more and more until we have the 10,000 things. Yin and yang continues to break down. This is going to break down into yin and yang. This is going to break down into yin and yang. This is going to break down into yin and yang, right? The two poles, the four phases, the eight trigrams, 16, until you have, what we see here in the world. Okay. I digress there. So when we talk about resolution, then we talk about Tai Chi, right? Then we talk about restraint. We talk about truth and patience. And when we talk about social order and civility, then we start to talk about empathy. Empathy as a skill to also master because um, we're also trying to preserve life, what life is. We want to reduce suffering. So we're going to go back to and finish here. Let me know what your thoughts are. But the freedom from emotional bondage is that freedom from anger when it arises. However, it requires you to drop the mask. If you can drop your mask, be authentic and say, "Yeah, I've got a liver. What does that mean?" Then you have started on the path with recognition. Next on that path is awareness of it. Now you're cultivating the live attention to anger arising because you've recognized it already. Now you can be aware of it, and then you can start to awaken to the instances and your response and your habit, right? And then along that path, you can be free from the emotional bondage. Because what happens is when we have two anger energies collide, we start to get soul entanglement, is my theory, right? If we carry soul entanglement through our lives, we can carry it even into the the other side, right? So if anyone's interested in looking at the idea of reincarnation here, I think it's interesting because, and then also trying to understand if there is attached and mutual soul karma, right? So if you entertain that idea, then you can also entertain the concept of soul entanglement. How do souls get entangled like a knot? Or in a vicious cycle, it's because possibly there is a collision. What can bring about collision in our lives? Well, two energies of anger. It's not something that we all like to look at, but we have seen before, right? And popular culture will try to characterize the narrative as one uh, villain and one hero, but in everyone's individual story, they they're not going to admit or see themselves as the villain. Everyone sees themselves in their story and narrative as the hero. So what happens when you get two heroes with inflamed livers, colliding? That takes us back to our inner cultivation and and then what we can do. So benevolence is the balancing energy. Let's look at the character for benevolence. Run. On the left is the character for a person. That's the radical for a human being, humankind, Homo sapien. On the right is the number two. So the meaning here defines humanity by how two people coexist. So it's the virtue of relationship. Remember, we've been sort of teasing out this idea of what is relationship. Thich Nhat Hanh um, refers to this as interdependent. Everything is interdependent. Is everyone interdependent? When we look at heaven, man, and earth as uh, the three cosmic powers, the sun, psi, right? Then that means, in terms of relationship, soul, soul family is one large energy, right? M- Man, humanity is one force, one energy that is the mediator of heaven and earth energy. I love this concept. I think it's so profound, but let me know what you think. While anger is a solidarity, pressurized experience, benevolence is the act of expanding one's inner garden to include of the presence and the needs for another, right? Being in the present moment with your cultivated inner garden and inner bloom. That's the inner bloom right there. Anger, new, right? This is really interesting. I stumbled upon this here. What is the character breakdown of new? All right. Typically, you don't have one phrase like that. Typically, there's two words. So typically you'd have like new something, like maybe new chi, like anger chi, but I'd have to look more into that. So the top represents slave, I guess the top part of this character, and that's derived from a hand holding a woman, implying captivity or forced labor. And the bottom part is shin. We talked about shin a second ago, the heart mind, regulating the mind and regulating the heart mind to cultivate the horse wisdom mind. So you have those two components. Very interestingly, very interesting. Etymologically, anger is seen as a state of being a slave to one's heart, right? Interesting, right? Because when we talk about the three energy centers, you have the upper energy center, the middle energy center, and the lower energy center. The um, being a slave to one's emotion means that the upper energy center is going to start to act upon the heart. Here's another interesting thing, how hurt people. Why would someone act out to go and kill another person? Are they perhaps a slave to their heart? Is there an anger issue there? Has that chi become stagnant and they haven't figured out how to let it out or circulate it in a appropriate way? Then that takes us to the martial moralities, right? And the need to study the martial moralities, right? If you're under the influence of anger and you're practicing righteousness, it's a skewed righteousness. If you're under the influence of benevolence, this righteousness is moral. But there's a yin and a yang to everything, even righteousness, even respect, even humility, even will, goodwill, ill will. That's one of the hindrances in Buddhism, ill will. The mind can start to uh, go down that path of ill will. It's a loss of sovereignty where the internal pressure, the wood chi, has taken the general hostage. The anger has taken the general, which could also be thought of as the upper energy center. When the upper energy center has been taken hostage by the liver, then that can, we've seen that. That can then be look like a lot of these things here. So let me know what you think. I love talking about this. Tomorrow we'll have a meditation on this circulation of energy, the soft skills meditation, being springy, bendable, malleable, but also moving forward with our intention, with our love, with our vision, our manifestation, as we try to stay out of soul entanglements, right? Steer clear of emotional bondage, right? So, um, until next time, embrace the woo and may your chi flow smoothly.